Jason Fitz, Yahoo Sports, is joining us this week from Radio Row, of course, and we always appreciate him giving us time, but especially him being busy out on the road right now. Jason, I've never attended Radio Row. Some people say it's the coolest thing ever. Other people say it's overrated. Where are you? Obviously, you're excited to be there. I'm jealous that you're there, of course. But what is your takeaway for those who have never been to Radio Row? What is that experience like?
It's like summer camp with a bunch of people that have all met before and hang out. Like, so here's the thing. I think if you work in this business, it's a really cool thing to be around and be a part of. For consumers, for fans, I got to be honest, like, it's sort of an antiquated process in some ways. Like, think about the fact that 20 years ago, if Deion Sanders came on your radio station and you heard it from Media Row, you'd sit there and say, "Oh my God, we got to hear from Deion." Well, now in social media world, the minute Deion goes on with anybody, he's really gone on with all of us. So the fact that you see the same person going from booth to booth to booth to booth doing the same interviews, like it's redundant. But the other part of this is it's just part of the fun. It's part of the joy getting to see everybody out here and everybody being a part of it.
Jason, it's the big game. It's now. I don't know what the rules are on Radio Row. Does the NFL have lawyers if you say the word Super Bowl, or is it the big game? What are we calling it when you're on air right now?
Yeah, I'm probably supposed to say big game, and I still say the other two nasty words. But yeah, like it's one of the stupidest trademark things I've ever heard in my life. Like the fact that somebody comes and says you can't say those two words. I'm like, oh, what are we doing? That's just it's the worst. I feel like I'm talking about the Kmart special version of the game every time I say it's the big game.
The last time they played this game, the Eagles and the Chiefs, I felt like the Eagles, and I don't feel like it. I just looked it up. 7 carries for both Sanders and Gainwell, 37 yards combined between the two of them. I feel like the Eagles are a little bit different roster this year. Still solid offensive line, solid defense. But right now, you're adding Saquon Barkley. How much of this game is going to be relying upon Saquon Barkley for the Eagles?
All of it. And the funny thing is, the two metrics I think you got to look at for Saquon, not just his yards, which are through the roof, hammer the over, but then the other part of it is the yards before contact. And so some of that is his greatness with the jump cuts and all these things that we see him do that's beautiful to watch. But the other part of it is just the Eagles' offensive line is dominant. So it's really the interior of the line play is, I think, the most interesting matchup here, because the interior of the Eagles' defensive line should be able to get after the interior of the Chiefs' offensive line. And vice versa. Like, conversely, Chris Jones is going to have the game of his life against Saquon. It's just everybody says, well, Spags isn't going to let Saquon run. Okay, that's like me saying I'm not going to let LeBron dunk on me. Like, it's a great plan, but you get in the game, it changes. Saquon's special. It's the biggest difference. And I will remind everybody, different offensive coordinator, different defensive coordinator for the Eagles since that last Super Bowl. So it's just a very different football game.
Over 2,000 yards in the regular season for Saquon made such a big difference for the Eagles all year. With that kind of production, and if he's able to have a big game and force the Eagles over the top in the Super Bowl, how could that change the running back market as we move forward in the offseason? We've seen those guys get underpaid a lot in the past because you didn't think it was necessary. But with a guy like Saquon leading the Eagles here, if he can have a big game on Sunday, how could that change that moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the concept of tread on the tires just needs to be retired for a minute from the great ones. Like, this happens to be a weird year. Like, I believe that Saquon is a generational talent, that Derrick Henry's a generational talent, that Josh Jacobs is a generational talent. So each of the three of them being discarded by their teams, none of the teams that let them go are better off because they don't have them. And also weird for the running back market is this year, one of the few position groups in the NFL draft that actually looks stacked is the running back. So, like, it is it feels like the resurgence, but I think instead of everybody saying this is the resurgence of the running back, I think what we have to just acknowledge here is that exceptional is going to be treated exceptionally. And this year, particularly, exceptional wins. If I had an MVP vote, it would have gone to Saquon. If the Eagles win this Super Bowl, it'll be because Saquon's the MVP. I don't think there's a more important player in this game than Saquon, and that includes Mahomes. Mahomes can have a terrible game and the Chiefs can still win. Saquon cannot have a terrible game and the Eagles still win this to me.
We've talked about the three-peat extensively and how much that means for Mahomes. Outside of Patrick Mahomes, what would a Super Bowl win do most for whose legacy? Who has the most to gain from winning this one?
And so it's interesting because you win one, does it really I mean, my God, we sit here with McCarthy and say, but he only won one Super Bowl, right? Like, we sit there all the time and apply that. So I do think that winning one takes some of the pressure off of Hurts. But you want to talk about, like, we're talking about legacy cemented. Like if the Chiefs win a third straight, then we need to really have a conversation about whether Bill Belichick is still the greatest coach of all time in the NFL. Because I'd argue right now, it sure as heck looks like it's going to be Andy Reid. And Charles Robinson said on Yahoo Sports last month when Bill Belichick took the North Carolina job, everybody kept talking about Bill wanting the all-time win record. Even Bill Belichick's camp looked around and said, "What's the point of getting the all-time win record when we're going to be surpassed by Andy in a couple of seasons?" Like everyone internally, even in Bill's camp, believes that Andy Reid's going to end up the winningest coach in NFL history. So 3 straight for Andy Reid for Mahomes. I mean, I think that makes you the best ever. I'm not sure how you can even start to question that. And by the way, I also think that it's pretty feasible the Chiefs could win again next year, the year after. So I think for the legacy and for the historic conversation, winning one is great, but winning 3 straight is something you never forget. Like we remember those 49ers, Joe Montana, Jerry Rice teams because of their complete and utter dominance. The Chiefs enter that category of all timer with this win. So I think there's actually weirdly more legacy to be gained for them.
With that being said, though, Jalen Hurts, obviously, if he gets this, win coming up on Sunday, and a lot of people, obviously, if the Chiefs or if the Eagles pull this win off, it's obviously going to be a lot of Saquon Barkley. But the last time these two teams went head to head in the Super Bowl, we saw Jalen Hurts not just play well, but outplay Patrick Mahomes. I mean, if he literally outplayed Patrick Mahomes in the last Super Bowl that they played. What would a win in this Super Bowl do for a guy like Jalen Hurts? To piggyback off that last question, just because we were talking yesterday, really trying to figure out where does Jalen Hurts stack up amongst the top quarterbacks in the NFL right now.
Yeah, I think it silences the concept that Jalen Hurts can't win. Like this is the nuances. Everybody wants to figure out if Jalen Hurts is, is he a top 5 quarterback in the NFL? Like I don't give a damn about any of that. What I say is like, can you win a Super Bowl with that guy? And that's the ultimately the only question. Like we talked before about the fact that I'd rather put guys on tiers like at a bar. So are you top shelf? Are you well? Are you mid? Like what type of vodka are you? And so to me, the question that gets answered here is, can you win a Super Bowl with Jalen Hurts? Which, by the way, the answer is clearly yes. I mean, they were in that game. They could have won that game before with Jalen Hurts. So you look at all of this and say, can you win it? Yes. This definitively answers that. This takes the conversation and quiets it around Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni. I mean, Nick Sirianni not that different than Ryan Day. A few months ago, it was like, oh, this guy's getting fired, and now it's like, oh, this guy might actually win it all, and then we might actually have to put some respect on his name. Like that happens from a win here.
Speaking of Ryan Day, thanks to your team, he's now looking for an offensive coordinator. The Raiders go and get Chip Kelly. I tell you what, I really like the Raiders coaching staff. I think it's probably one of the more impressive coaching staffs in all of football. Obviously, no matter how good the coaching is, you need the quarterback, the straw to stir the drink. But just in what you've seen Pete Carroll do already as far as putting this coaching staff together, how impressed are you with the aggressiveness of what they've done, especially, getting Graham, obviously keeping him there, and then going to get a Chip Kelly out of Ohio State who just won a national championship?
The smart part about keeping Graham was that really what you're doing there is you're keeping Max. I mean, Max Crosby at any point could ask for a trade just like Myles Garrett has, right? Like at any point that could happen. And I would make the argument that Max has every bit the same right to win that Myles Garrett does. But you keep Graham somebody that he's comfortable with. You keep a defense that even with the injuries has played above its head repeatedly, and then you put a bunch of adults on the offensive side of the ball that frankly I trust immensely with quarterback development. Like whoever the quarterback is for the Raiders next year is going to be better because they have Chip Kelly and Pete Carroll than they would have been under the previous regime. I just think that's a pretty easy statement to make. And the most impressive part about this for Chip Kelly, and maybe the bit of peace to Ohio State fans that don't love that he left, is $6 million. Like the Raiders went out and reportedly gave an offensive coordinator $6 million a year to come work there. What does that say? That says that the Raiders are willing to spend whatever it takes to become a competent organization. There's no salary cap on coaches. So in the NFL, I've never understood this. Like if you really love Ben Johnson, if he was your guy, then go offer him $25 million a year. Like he's not going to say no to that. Like there's some element to me where I don't care about my billionaire's money. I just don't. So if Mark Davis is spending $6 million just to get Chip Kelly, what he's really sending is a message to the entire NFL like, hey, no, we're going to do the right thing. We're going to spend whatever it takes to put adults in the room to build this team. I think that's an important part of what's happening here. That's part of how you get seen differently. And if you're a team like the Raiders or a team like the Browns, you're a bad franchise, you have to figure out a way to just change the sea of suck that you live in. I think it takes money. I think it takes adults. I think it takes ripping it down to the studs. I think it takes patience. All of these things the Raiders, I think, are showing right now. So I'm actually more encouraged by this chapter of the Raiders and their hires than I have been in legit 20 years.
So obviously the Raiders showing their commitment, going to get a Chip Kelly and being willing to spend. And you brought up how, that just shows that that organization is willing now to spend, to commit to that. But if you were Chip Kelly, who the last time he left the NFL, many people said that was a failed experiment. His reputation in the NFL took a major hit. Obviously leaves the UCLA job to take the OC job at Ohio State, and then now welcome back in NFL circles. You'd have to think he was going to be very cautious and very picky about the job that he takes. And without there being a quarterback with your Raiders right now, we said yesterday that we feel like because the Raiders spent $6 million on him and because he picked the Raiders to go be their OC, does that signify that possibly them being aggressive to trade up to get a quarterback in this draft?
So it tells me they have a plan. I don't think he takes that job without a plan. So that plan's one of two things. Well, number one, they're going to trade up, which I think is probably a pretty reasonable assumption. Number two would be they are wildly comfortable. Like, one thing we have to go back to, there were people around Denver that were telling us 3 months before the draft that Sean Payton had his guy and wanted his guy. We all thought it was going to be Bo Nix. Did we think it was going to work out this well? No. But to me, this becomes either a conversation about trading up or a conversation about being wildly comfortable with somebody else in this draft, whether that's Jackson Dart or Jalen Milroe or even Will Howard. I don't know. But to me, there's no way that Chip Kelly doesn't take this job, or takes the job, I should say, unless there was a clear discussion of what is our plan at quarterback, who are we comfortable with. They must have something that they're going after. I think the easy answer is a trade up, and a trade up would make a ton of sense. But I would also caution. I believe that there are two transcendent players in this draft: Abdul Carter and Henry. Those are the two guys, right? Like, so we all know that those are the two guys that I think are absolutely there. There's a couple of offensive linemen that are very good too. But I would caution anybody, including, for example, the Browns, if they're considering moving down. Well, man, you might need Abdul Carter now more than you thought. Can you move down to 6 and still get him? I don't think so. So, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens, because if the Giants are sitting there and quarterback's taken, then I think Abdul Carter is likely to go 3 or 4 in this thing. And so you can't move further down than that and still get a dude. And all of these teams that stink better worry about getting a dude. So I think it's a little curious, but yes, they must have a plan.
Jason Fitz, Yahoo Sports, hanging out with us from Radio Row here off the bench, presented by United Dairy Farmers. Jason, you talked about the Raiders. You talked about them having a plan. Speaking of teams with great plans, the Cleveland Browns. Obviously, whatever great plan that they had, it wasn't enough to convince Myles Garrett that, hey, stay here. We have a plan. Trust us. It's going to work this time. Obviously, stuff happening behind the scenes that have led to this split. The trade request heard around the world yesterday that had everybody talking. Myles Garrett wants out of Cleveland. Many people are saying, what took so long? Other people are saying, man, this is really, really bad for the Browns. We said it could be obviously really bad, the situation that they're in, but it might be a way to kind of fix some of the issues that they have moving forward, because he's going to get such a big return. What was your thoughts of the Myles Garrett trade request yesterday? And then what do you make of the fact that Cleveland's coming out and saying we have no intentions of trading him, almost doubling down on the comments that Andrew Berry made last week?
Well, I think they have to keep any sort of trade value, but also, like, whatever happens here, it's all the fault of the Deshaun Watson transaction, like, in general, because look, they're not winning enough games because they don't have a quarterback, because the Deshaun Watson transaction. If they trade him, the complications of the salary cap are absolutely epic, which is difficult to take on because of the Deshaun Watson situation. So, like, either way, it's that. But here's the thing: I lived through Khalil Mack being traded, and I listened to everybody at the time absolutely roast the Raiders and say, hey, you don't trade a Hall of Fame caliber player. And I believe that, like, having lived through the trade, I believe you do not trade a Hall of Fame player, because realistically, bad teams are bad more often than not because they don't draft particularly well. So what are you going to get in return? It's real, like, I hear everybody say you're going to get a haul of picks. Okay. Even if you're getting multiple first rounders and a couple of players out of it, are you getting a Khalil Mack, or are you getting a Myles Garrett out of that? Not likely, right? Like, so the chances that you're actually going to get return on this are minimalistic. The same arguments that I'm making about why Max Crosby, even if he came in tomorrow to the Raiders and said I want to trade, if I'm the Raiders, I say no because I can't get enough to get anything back. The draft picks are the farthest thing from a guarantee. All draft picks are cheap labor. And right now, what message am I sending to my entire fan base if I let the one Hall of Famer that I have walk out the door? I hear you on it's going to be a rebuild, but like, again, when Khalil Mack was gone, and the number of times that we've all sat here when the Raiders traded John Gruden and they got multiple first round draft picks for it, everybody said, look at how brilliant that is. They're going to be able to restock the kitty. Okay. Are we forgetting how often teams draft poorly? How many bad first round picks are selected? So, yeah, like the chances that you're going to nail these draft picks are low anyway. And so, trading, I wouldn't do it. There is nothing that somebody would offer me today that I would turn around and trade for Myles Garrett unless it was a quarterback on a rookie deal. Like, you want to offer me Jaden Daniels? Let's have a conversation. And there ain't no way in hell anybody's doing that. So, I think unfortunately, Myles Garrett wants to trade, and people in hell want ice water. Like, it's not going to happen.
So you're saying Cleveland, not that you think that they shouldn't, but you feel like they won't actually pull the trigger on this, that he will be a Brown.
I think Myles Garrett will be a Cleveland Brown next season. I don't think there's any way possible that Myles Garrett is not a Cleveland Brown.
Love it. Clip it. That's a good soundbite. I appreciate that. So there you go.
You're welcome.
Jason, you the man. We appreciate you as always. Send us out with this, your Super Bowl prediction. Are the Chiefs winning 3 straight? Jalen Hurts getting his first Super Bowl? What's going to happen this coming up Sunday?
I mean, the only way you beat the Chiefs is if you blow them out. As I keep saying, Mahomes has had the ball in his hand 7 times in the playoffs and Super Bowl, needing a score to win. He is 7 for 7 in the last 4 minutes of a game. So the only way you beat him is if you're up by 2 scores. So even though I think Philly's better in every possible way, and I think Saquon should be able to run the football, I can't find a way that the Chiefs get blown out coming off a bye week for Andy Reid, which means close game. Close game means Mahomes wins. Chiefs win 3 straight.
Jason, you the man. Appreciate you. Enjoy the rest of the week on Radio Row, and of course, enjoy the Super Bowl. Thank you for your time.
Appreciate you, boys. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.